Good morning, dear colleagues. Welcome in the European Parliament, the heart of European democracy, for our debate why the EU needs targeted treaty changes. And we, as the FEPS and S&D, have a special approach that we want to engage with you in a debate about. And we wanted to start with an introductory welcome of Irache Garcia as S&D president, who wanted to be here, couldn't be here, but nevertheless, therefore, comes with a video message for us. And I think we will now hear and see her.
Queridos amigos,
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, we are living in times of uncertainty. After the financial crisis of 2008, the Union lived through the Brexit and UK's exit, and then we were surprised by the world pandemic. The war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East is keeping us busy, whereas we have to continue making our efforts toward the green transition and digital transition. Globalization and questioning of multilateral issues have been challenging us, and 2019 showed that we need mutual independence, but the need to cooperate with solidarity, which is the calling of the EU, and we must adapt to the new realities without losing sight of our principles. The founding fathers of Europe were very clear on this. So the Schuman Declaration says that Europe will not be built overnight, but gradually through concrete achievements based on solidarity. The Conference of the Future of Europe was a very unique product to try to get out of this Brussels bubble and deal with civil societies, companies, NGOs, and men and women citizens, with bringing them together with political representatives. And I chaired the working group on social justice, economy, and employment, and this group put forth amendments to fight inequality, poverty, and promote civil dialogue. The citizens were clear. They really want the union to work to improve daily lives and improve society. Since the end of this conference, we've been working to make all these amendments a reality. Some of these recommendations can be applied, but still the others would require changes in the Parliament. And here in the Parliament, where our colleague Rabadiso has carried out priorities for our group, and I should like to thank Febs and the other members of our progressivist family for all his support. Thank you, everybody, for working collectively. More than 30 years after launching the single market, social progress has finally appeared in the Treaty of the Union to balance economic freedoms. The social pillar is the way we are taking, and giving us a legal way of going into a just transition and gender equality, and is the golden rule to make the necessary investments to meet our economic, social, and environmental goals, putting an end to the dogma of austerity which was imposed on us in 2008. All too long, economic interests have prevailed over personal and people's interests, and many citizens saw Europe as an ultra-liberal picture. And that is where population came out, but we can now change that picture. We need to highlight changes in decision-making processes in councils. So this has done away with national veto, which actually sanctioned violations of our principle of democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental rights. Dear friends, the youth needs solidarity to not destroy the planet. The EU has exclusive competence in the fight against climate change. A new legal basis needs to be established for stopping the global warming. And it has been made clear that the market hasn't received everything. The production of vaccines and public procurement, but with our proposals, the European Union will have more power and competences in health, and with our social families work, Europe will have more impact on taxes. As you see, the reform in the treaty is not an end in itself, but a way of making reality what citizens are asking from us. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today, but I wish you very fruitful discussions, and I am really expecting your conclusions, and I'm very interested in them. Thank you.
What an inspiring speech for the start of our debate. I will hand over to Maria soon, but to say that this is so timely that we are meeting here and discussing, because next week in plenary we will have the vote on the report that we did and worked a year on in the European Parliament. And I have to say, before I hand over to Maria, it was incredible what FEBS did to support this process. And the way that was done was really essential also. So a really big, from my heart, thank you to FEBS for this. Also debates you organized, these inspirations you gave, and also content-wise expertise when it was needed, very targeted. So this is how it should work between a political group and the foundation. So I hand over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much, Gabi, and good morning for everybody. It is really a pleasure to be part of this symposium. EU treaties, why we need target changes. This has been a pleasure to collaborate with the European Parliament and particularly with the S&D Group. I must say that the starting point for our inspiration was the Conference on the Future of Europe, because we saw a lot of engagement and expectations expressed by citizens. They came with a big ambition for the European project. And then when we start distilling the outcomes of the conference, we understood that some of these ambitions could only be turned into reality if we will be able to open the treaties for target changes. I was in the past part of the team negotiating the Lisbon Treaty. Lisbon, this is my hometown, and I was appointed by the Portuguese government by that time to conduct this negotiation. And I do think that the Lisbon Treaty was a quite big achievement, because we could rescue part of the constitutional treaty, and this was a leap forward, particularly, I would say, when it comes democracy, because we extended qualified majority and co-decision procedures to many new areas. But I'm also the one to recognize that after this accumulation of crises, the financial crisis, then the pandemics, more recently the war, while at the same time we need to conduct an ambitious plan for the green and digital transition with social cohesion, all these combined, this in fact requires some target changes in the treaty. And I'm so pleased that in the European Foundation of our family, FEPS, we could set up such a high-level group. So many thanks to all my colleagues, because we started during the pandemics. I remember that many of our meetings were on the screen, but we finalized our work in the right moment, because as Gabi just told you, we are on the eve of an historical moment, the moment where the European Parliament, the heart of European democracy, will hopefully adopt a report which is ambitious up to the level and addressing also the responsibilities of the European Council. In the meantime, as you know, many other calls for opening the treaty have come. I will identify particularly the Franco-German report, focusing more precisely on the implications of a new wave of enlargement, but other positions, notably a manifesto from European personalities calling for a new focus on European public goods. So we are so pleased that our report is exactly coming with a comprehensive response to this call. We need to move to a new phase of the European project inspired by the new European public goods citizens are asking for. And so like that, we are now conducting our symposium, starting with the first panel, which is to be chaired by Gabi Bischoff. And Gabi, if I may, special congratulations for your work as SND co-rapporteur in something which will probably become one of the most important reports of this legislature. Many thanks for your work also.
Thank you very much, Maria. And indeed, I think the interesting approach that you did in your project is not just focusing on institutions, but focusing really on public good citizenship and democracy. So why do we need strong and stronger institutions to deliver on these issues for the citizen? And you started, and Irache too, with mentioning the Conference on the Future of Europe, the work of the citizens, and that was the main inspiration for our work, because our job in the European Parliament, we really pushed for this initiative to involve the citizens from the beginning, was also to look at the proposals of the citizens and to transform them into concrete proposals for treaty changes. And I will steer a debate here on this institutional changes with very distinguished speakers. But let me say also, I think it is very important that we see at the moment that Europe is really capable to act and react in crises. I think this capacity is something very positive, but it seems to have, besides some really great problems, especially in the Council, in developing positive projects and visions for the future of Europe and really reforming the way we are doing European policy, where we see the limitations in the crises that we face every day. But nevertheless, this energy is lacking that is necessary to do the reforms. And we will discuss here in the first panel what are key reforms here that are essential. And the first speaker is Jo Leinen. I mean, I don't have to introduce Jo Leinen because everyone knows you, not only that you were once chair of the AFCO committee, you delivered a lot on the future of Europe also here in this project. And I think I can say that you is that you were, I think, the German heavyweight in any question on constitutional affairs in the European Parliament. And this is why we are very happy to have you here. And also to look a bit what essential reforms do you think are needed here, especially to strengthen the system of representative democracy, because as I said, we need these reforms to deliver better to the citizens on the promises Europe gives to its citizens. And you will have, I think, around 5 minutes to do so, like every other speaker, and then, but I'm sure, I know you can do that.
Yeah, dear Gabi and Maria and all the friends, when I came this morning to the Parliament, I was tempted to go to the plenary because I was in convention mode. And having been part of 2 conventions, I felt excited. And I think the next convention will again be an exciting exercise. Anyway, I'm very satisfied that the Socialists, Social Democrats take the initiative, if not the leadership, for a stronger Europe and a more citizen-centered European policy. And Maria, thank you so much for taking this initiative for the FEP study, what we have done over many sessions, mostly online. And it is really a wonderful work, an analysis of the shortcomings of the EU, the treaties, but as well the EU policies. And with full respect for the AFCO report, I must say I tribute really affirmation what you have done. Now, since I do European affairs, I here speak about issues and not about institutions. That is always the counter reply when it comes to treaty changes. And indeed, we are speaking about issues. Treaty change is not an objective in itself. It is an instrument to do the job that the citizens are expecting from us. And it was mentioned, the conference, Future of Europe, the citizens panels, the Eurobarometer shows clearly what the citizens want. They want different sort of securities. Yeah? From military aggression, they want economic security, they want health security, they want an environment that is sound, they want a better migration management, gender equality, and so on. That are the issues about them we are speaking here. And the question is the EU able to do the job? Yeah, we can do a lot of things with the Lisbon Treaty, which was a big step forward, but we can a lot of things not do because it lacks the legal basis. And the EU is a union of law. For EU action, it needs a legal basis, and that is the treaty provisions given to all of us and the member states. Now, I think FEPS has done a good job to focus on common European goods, on European public goods. That is probably a mantra that we have to profile in the election campaign to make the citizens aware that only together we can achieve, let's say, major solutions for the really big challenges of today's world. And therefore, we have selected 5 priorities. There could be more, but we assembled them about 5 priorities. The number 1 is the capacity to act. I mean, it's so obvious, what a shame that even in humanitarian decisions, we are blocked by the one or the other veto. So the veto has to go away. That is the number 1 in foreign affairs, but as well in other topics. The second chapter is we need a new division of competences between the member states and the EU to empower the EU where it's necessary. And there, the 2 transformations are in the forefront. The digital transformation, digital was not known in the time of Lisbon Treaty. And if you come back from China or from the US or even now from India, you know that we are in a race for the digital world and the technologies, and we have to empower ourselves to really equip us with all what is necessary, and not only to create a big digital market, but as well to have the capacities. The ecological transition, yeah, we need an energy union, which is not yet done, and we need EU competence when the EU has international obligations. I have been on many COPs on climate, and you see always the backdoor struggling between the member states and the EU. Do we do it? Don't we do it? I think this is out of time. We have to have a next step forward. And then, of course, as progressives, the social dimension of the EU, as we pointed it out, most what has been done was related to the working area, to have a level playing field in the common market. We are far beyond. Citizens, we have to address all the citizens, from education to health, and on the Malaga Congress, housing. When I came in 1999, we had a colleague from Brussels, Alan Hutchinson. He is still in Brussels City Council, and he said, we have to speak about housing in the EU policy. And I said, housing is something you do at home, you don't do on EU level. But you see how things are progressing, what is a common need and a common obligation even to do. So the next chapter was, of course, if you have to do all of this, you need money. And we address it clearly that the budget cycle should be with the electoral cycle, that we need own resources, as we have done with the Resilience Fund for the long-term investments. And of course, we need special funds for rare diseases and for unemployment policy. Coming to democracy, we addressed it so many times. We need an EU election system where the citizens have a clear choice for the common European goods. They don't have it now. We will see it again that the election campaign is partly domestic controversies and not EU policy. We need, of course, more participatory elements. Citizens panels are a new idea. Others have to follow. And we have to look again in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, what new rights, digital rights, for example, but as well, what new duties EU citizens should follow to have a common unity. To finish, Gabi, the war in Ukraine is a new reality. Who has thought that Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia probably gets candidate status and we start negotiations in an enlargement area where others have waited for 20, 25 years. So we need in this new reality a new approach for deepening and enlarging. And I think the way forward we propose is that sectoral integration, security, energy, research, common programs could be a step-by-step method where we have these people and the countries with us. But of course, without reforming enlargement is not possible, even not for Montenegro, I would say. It is impossible to have other members if we don't get rid of the veto and have better decision-making possible. So all what we have said is important enough to have a convention. It cannot be done by an IGC. So I think the public is waiting and the citizens are waiting for a convention, and our collective power should be good enough that before the elections, the European Council gives a green light for this convention. I think we all be part to have a stronger EU and have a more citizen-centered EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for also, in the end, addressing enlargement, because I did find it quite interesting. 2 weeks ago, there was a big conference in Berlin with many foreign ministers from European countries and from enlargement countries, and a key message also, for example, from these foreign ministers of these countries that want to become a member said, yeah, but if you reform, you will be more attractive to us. And I did find it quite convincing, because everyone understands that we have to reform to be more capable to act, but also that at the moment the state Europe is in and the complexity and the problems to act also have an impact on the outside. And I'm very happy now really to have also Giovanni Grevi here, a warm welcome, visiting professor at the College of Europe and Sciences Po, very well known on publications in the question of foreign policy and international relations. And I think when you ask citizens about what should change in Europe and what is needed, I think foreign policy is one of the first issues, because it is so obvious, and it was with the war, the question of sanctions, also you addressed this. So what is your proposal? How should a new approach in foreign affairs look like? And especially this question that Macron brought in of European sovereignty into the debate, how should that look like? What would be, from your point of view, core elements for that?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to share a few thoughts on these matters, as it has been a pleasure to be part of this adventure, this enterprise in thinking about some targeting treaty changes and delivering this report. I want to start from your question, Madam Chair, because my opening line would be that it is difficult to think of a viable and thriving European democracy without Europe being able to deliver the public goods that citizens expect. And it's difficult to think of a European Union that is able to deliver these public goods without a much stronger capacity to act. And capacity to act also entails capacity to decide, to set priorities, and to follow them through consistently and across the board. And that is, I would say, in a nutshell, what European sovereignty is about. It's about establishing a strong and democratically founded capacity to decide at the European level, and the ability to address the growing external agenda that the European Union has been facing over the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years. So, no viable democracy without a strong ability to deliver public goods, no strong ability to deliver public goods without a stronger ability to take sovereign decisions at the European level, and no strong ability to take sovereign decisions at the European level if the European Union is not able to deal with the multidimensional challenges that it faces on the global level. We all know the saying that foreign policy starts at home. That is clear. We cannot deliver a functioning foreign policy if we do not have the capacity to process and to take decisions. But it is also true, it seems to me, that to some extent the future of European integration starts abroad, because the amount of challenges and threats that Europe has had to face in the last 10 or 15 years makes it clear that if Europeans, through the EU and other platforms, are not capable of dealing with these challenges from the outside in, then the capacity to deliver public goods will be impaired, and therefore the credibility of the European Union and the democratic legitimacy of the European Union is going to be impaired. So essentially my starting point is really to make this very, very strong connection between building a more sovereign Europe, meaning a Europe capable to decide and to deliver outcomes, and the democratic legitimacy and resilience of the European Union itself. Now, within this equation, as I tried to say, the external dimension plays an increasingly important role. There is no need to recall the reasons why we face an extremely turbulent, volatile international system. In a recent FEPS book, this was defined as the risk of a regressive world. This is not a prediction, is a risk, is a scenario, but is one way of encapsulating the implications, the long-term implications of the trends and events that we see unfolding now, from the collapse of the European security order to a number of shared global challenges which already carry huge costs for Europe, for its citizens, and of course, across the world. So this strategic context calls clearly for a very integrated strategic approach at the European level. This is also the reason why it is important to put reforms about, for example, CFSP in context. Because yes, we can reform the decision-making of CFSP, and that is very important indeed, but that has to be part of a larger reform of the European Union at large and of external action, including stronger competencies, better decision-making procedures, and clearer objectives, including as formulated at treaty levels, because this is part of dealing not only with foreign and security policy challenges, but with a transformation that we see occurring at the global stage. One may say that if we are facing a polycrisis, then the European Union needs to be a polypower, able to operate in different ways on different issues with a different toolkit of policy instruments and to mobilize that quickly. A couple of considerations of why this matters and why joint action clearly matters to deliver effective outcomes on the international level and therefore to deliver public goods at the European level is that we need to bear in mind the weight of Europe on the international stage is actually shrinking. This is something that has to really push us out of complacency. You take the share of global GDP, you take the share of global trade, you take the share of global R&D. I was looking recently at some OECD statistics. It's quite striking. According to the statistics, the US invests annually in research and development something in the range of 700 billion. China invests something in the range of 600 billion. The European Union invests something in the range of 400 billion. It's a lot of money, but it's a long way from the two leaders out there. And this is something that we can apply to various other parameters on the global stage. So it is imperative to work together to invest more and to invest better to deliver public goods. And we need the right institutional instruments to do so. Now, a slightly more upbeat way of making the same point is that there is a huge amount of untapped potential. If we have not been working sufficiently together and effectively enough together so far, albeit with significant progress, I would say, on various accounts on the last few years. It was mentioned, for example, the reaction to the crisis in Ukraine certainly saw some significant step forwards, but there is a lot of untapped potential that can be mobilized by doing more together and doing it better. How far can institutional reform help us in this direction, in particular when it comes to foreign and security policy? Well, my starting point there would be that we shouldn't ask institutions and institutional reform what they cannot deliver. Institutional reform cannot per se fix political problems and political divides in the area of foreign and security policy. If there are divisions downright across member states, it is not by institutional reforms that you will address them. It is a patient, permanent, daily job over the years, shaping a strategic culture, a stronger sense of responsibility for European defense, and the resources that are needed to take this responsibility. However, what we can ask institutional reform is not to lock in political problems. Institutional reforms may not be sufficient to address political problems and solve them, but they are necessary. And they are necessary to avoid that political problems are locked into inadequate decision-making procedures. And of course, here I'm thinking of the principle of unanimity that applies to CFSP, and I will say my final points on this. There is a lot of debate, of course, and it is an important debate. There are skeptical voices as to the need to extend unanimity to CFSP. It would expose divisions among member states. It would not be able to bridge gaps and political divides among member states. There is the risk that member states may not apply decisions if they are in a minority, and so on and so forth. And I think that these are important arguments to be addressed. But I would say that if there are divisions among member states and the member states want to veto a decision, the political divides are already out there, are already in the public. It is not QMV that exposes them. Instead, QMV helps create political incentives to pave the way to convergence, to a compromise. And the key word in CFSP is, of course, not about imposing solutions on member states, not possible, not desirable, but it is about creating paths to convergence, and QMB is one. And the second purpose is, of course, preventing one or two countries from kidnapping joint positions. So QMB is best thought of as a veto prevention policy or a veto prevention mechanism. It is not about imposing the rule of a majority on a tiny minority. It is about preventing the instrumentalization of veto in a way that impairs not only an effective a common foreign security policy, but also a suitable implementation of what are constitutional principles of the European Union, the principle of loyal cooperation, for example, which are enshrined in the treaties and should be better implemented, including through some of the institutional reform that these reports that we're discussing today push forward. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this important elaboration, especially also what institutional reforms can fix and what they can't. I think that is impossible. That is very important to highlight also in regarding to expectations, and that institutional reforms have to give a new vision also in the way how we work together as within the European Union, as you stretched it sort of as a way to more and better compromises and convergence. The next speaker on my list is Stéphane Collignon, also professor of economy, and I think when I read his name somewhere or hear it, I immediately think about economic governance. I don't know why. You are digitally connected, Stefan, and I hope it all works, and you have the floor now.
Yes, good morning. I'm glad that I can talk to you from Harvard, where I am at the moment. Sorry, I can't be there in presence. I would like to invite you to think for a moment with me on a kind of new way of approaching European integration. We have done for decades the idea that we do things together and that will be good and create benefits for all citizens, and that is a motivating force in European integration. Unfortunately, today the debate is often about should we give up more up to the European level or not, and should we have more control, and this has been a block in many ways. When we look at public goods, from an economist point of view, however, the story is in a way much clearer. We can find ways in allocating responsibilities also for governance. And if I may for a second introduce the theory of public goods. First of all, public goods are always the case when some actions, whether they may come from private markets or from individual member state governments, when they have external effects, externalities. That means they have consequences for others who were not involved in the decision-making themselves. And with these externalities, the question is, where are the consequences of this? Now, we can distinguish several areas of private and public goods. We usually say that the issue is exclusion and jointness of production. Exclusion means access, and private markets are areas where you can exclude the potential consumers and the production is private. The pricing mechanism is ideal for that and efficient, and this is what economists usually talk about. However, when we talk about public goods, there is the possibility that for certain goods we can limit the access to the consumption of these goods. Typically something like a tennis club, for example, or a football club is only for those who have joined the club. They can play with the others. This is called, therefore, club goods, or in our report we call it community goods. There's, however, also another category of public goods where actually the access is possible for everyone, but the so it's not possible to exclude anyone, but the production is not joint. So these are common resource goods. That means, for example, in fishery, everyone could, in principle, go out and do fishing, but not the fish are limited, and therefore the risk with these public goods is that there is over consumption or excessive use of resources. And that is a different category. And then we have the pure public goods, where you cannot exclude and that you need to have joint capacity to produce. Now, if we take this kind of way of thinking into the European context, it seems to me that, first of all, we need to acknowledge that we have already all kinds of public goods. There is nothing that newly to be created in this. Yes, there are some areas where we need to do that, and it was mentioned by Jolainen before how important that is. But the point is that there are already many public goods that we have at the European level. At the European level means what? It means that all European citizens are affected by these public goods. And therefore, they are their public goods. They are the owners of it. And the idea that we have European public goods and national public goods and local public goods, you can look at it a bit like the ownership is like I can have a bicycle, I can have a car, and I can take an airplane. They all affect me directly, but there are different effects that are having impact on my well-being and my consequences. Now, these issues are totally important for the way how we govern these public goods, because joint public goods, the club goods, are easily managed by agreement, because if you don't pay the fee for the club, then you are out and you can't have the benefit of it, so that creates an incentive for people to cooperate. However, with the common resource goods, that is not the case, because everyone can have access, and potentially you cannot really sanction someone if he doesn't or she doesn't contribute sufficiently to the creation or maintenance and administration of these public goods. As a consequence, the governance of these public goods is different for these different public goods. What we have seen in the European Union over the last half century or more is that in terms of club goods, things have advanced enormously. But what we have specifically, since we have had a common currency, which is a hard budget constraint, which makes it much more difficult to exclude someone, or we have to cooperate in order to maintain the right policies that support the common currency. For that, you need much stronger forms of governance. And in addition to that, there's a time perspective. Some things can be done by rules for hard constraints, so that you can set up rules so that even the common resource goods would be managed efficiently. But there are other areas where that is not the case, where you actually need discretion and you need flexibility in assessment. Pandemic is an example, and other things. So if we look at the governance of these public goods, what comes out of it is that what we have in terms of club goods can easily be maintained by the intergovernmental mode of cooperation that we have established in our present institutions. However, for all those things where we have hard budget constraints, where the resources are limited, and that's particularly true for finance and budgets and so on, there you need a much harder way of imposing a single will, because you will not get the cooperation that is needed. I think this distinction is absolutely crucial for understanding what's going on in Europe, and it is explaining us why we have so much more difficulties nowadays in several policy areas that we didn't have in earlier years. Now, if that is the case, and we need to have more centralized decision-making for these particular targeted public goods, then the question is, who is deciding it? That raises the issue of democratic legitimacy. It raises the issue of how can the owners of these public goods actually exercise their choices, there are votes, there are common decision-making mechanisms. And that is an issue for democracy, which would mean that for those public goods, and particularly the common resource good management, we need much stronger institutions of democracy. We need, therefore, some kind of control in the common interest. And I think that can only come through representation in the European Parliament and a much stronger centralized decision-making mechanism for those things. This is the basic theory of European public goods. I've written a lot about that, but maybe we can stop at this moment here and discuss some implications later on. Vielen Dank. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you can hear the applause. Thank you very much, Stefan Collignon, and for your dedication for the subjects. And we know that it's the middle of the night in Harvard where you are, so we appreciate it even more. And linking the question of public goods and democracy and developing this link for us in the debate is very important. The next speaker, before we go then in a debate with you all, is Dominic Ruiz de Vesa. Everyone here in the European Parliament knows him because he is our SND AFCO coordinator. He is a member in CULT and AFCO and was also a member of our delegation on the conference on the future of Europe. And you mentioned already electoral law. It was floating through the room. And I think this is one of your priorities you are working on also. But my question is here, sort of also from your point of view, which core treaty changes do you think are needed here when we reflect, as we have been or have done it with the other speakers on public goods? That especially can only be delivered on European level. You have the floor, Dominic.
Thanks a lot, dear Gabi, for the kind introduction and for your excellent work as representing our group in this, probably I think the most important file of the legislature, because this is the first time in 14 years, right, since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, that there is a first attempt to reform the treaty. So this is really historic without exaggeration. And also, of course, thanks to FEPS and Maria Joao for having provided this important background study that I know was feeding into Gabi's efforts during the entire process, 1 year of working on this, as I said, very important file. And I'm very happy to be here also with the experts, with Giovanni, Jo Leinen, my predecessor as AFCO coordinator, but also my predecessor as president of the Union of European Federalists. And Mercedes Bresso is there, also predecessor as AFCO coordinator and president of the Union of European Federalists. So I guess there is no coincidence that there are always lots of federalists in the AFCO committee. No? Now, I think it has already been said why we need to reform the Union also from the institutional perspective. But just to summarize, in two key concepts, the need for more Europe and the need for better Europe. This was coming from the Conference on the Future of Europe very clearly. There was a demand, including from the citizens, to have a European Union that is more able to act, as it has been said also, in different policy fields. Climate, very importantly, was mentioned, but also health, which obviously in the context of the conference development that makes sense. And as you know, we don't have a shared competency in the domain of public health. But also in the field of education, there was a demand by the conference regarding the need to provide minimum standards of knowledge about the EU in all member states. So this was, in my interpretation, also calling for a shared competence in education, not in the entire, of course, EU curriculum, but in the entire curriculum, but in the field of European citizenship. Those are some examples of more Europe. We could also think of digital, of course. And then we have the second leg of Better Europe. And there was also a call from the conference on Better Europe. And Better Europe, by Better Europe, I mean more efficient in the decision-making process and more democratic in the decision-making process. And that requires, obviously, overcoming unanimity in the Council, but also, which unanimity is neither efficient nor democratic. I mean, of course, if everyone in the room here is in agreement to change the colors of the wall, that's perfect. But if only one person is in disagreement, that's really not very democratic, no? Democracy is the rule of the majority. So unanimity, welcome, but nice to have. But if we don't have it, okay, it's more democratic to have the majority decide and not one decides, no? But also more democracy from the side of the role of the European Parliament. The European Parliament still doesn't have the power to initiate legislation, as you know, doesn't have the power to co-decide with Council on very, very important matters like debt, taxation, and own resources. And this is really a problem that we had for many years, but it is becoming more acute. Why is becoming more acute? Because of the recovery plan in particular. The recovery plan has established for the first time what is in fact federal debt. I say for the first time because in the past there has been some debt issuances, but only to finance loans. But this is the first time that we have issued debt to finance transfers. So, but the Parliament plays no role in the decision to issue the debt. Only the Council has that power. And this is why also the problem is more acute, because we have also agreed that we will establish some forms of pan-European taxation to pay back this debt. And once again, the European Parliament plays no role in this matter. So this is why this is becoming even this question more necessary. So this is the need for reforms. Now we have to add to that, this is the general questions. Of course, we have to put this in the context of a world that is totally different from the world of the time of Lisbon Treaty, 2007. So think of 2007, when it was adopted, not entering into force, but when it was adopted. No financial crisis in the US, no euro crisis, no Arab Springs, not even the first aggression of Russia in Georgia, and then the first aggression of Russia in Ukraine. No Brexit, no Trump, of course, no pandemic and no war in Ukraine. So it's a totally different world. And when the world has changed, Europe has changed. And this is why the Maastricht Treaty came after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was not by coincidence. This is why the 1984, one of the reasons why the 1984 Spinelli Treaty was not at the right historical time, it was proved by the fact that most of the ideas of the Spinelli project came into force in the Maastricht Treaty, but after the fall of the Berlin Wall. I mean, there was a historical event that provided for this idea to flourish at the time. But then we have another factor that makes reform of the Union, also from the institutional dimension, unavoidable, which is the war in Ukraine and the relaunch of enlargement. Enlargement had been paralyzed since the last accession of Croatia 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, and no one was thinking about that. And the Western Balkans appear to be forever in a waiting room. But all of a sudden, with this war, of course, there is a moral and geopolitical necessity to relaunch enlargement, and obviously it cannot be only for Ukraine. So now we're looking to a union of potentially 36 member states, which means ceteris paribus, as the economists like to say, 36 national vetoes in foreign policy, in taxation, right? 36 commissioners. 36 commissioners, we have to become even more creative in inventing portfolios for commissioners, right? Ceteris paribus. And of course, the size of the parliament, an ever-increasing parliament, or we have a parliament of 750 for 36 member states. So a lot to discuss there. Now, so I think the case that we're making, and I'm sure it will pass next week from the parliament, I think it's very clear. However, and with this I finish, we have a big danger here. And the big danger is that there are many, particularly in the conservative, in the think tanks and particularly conservative experts that have been saying for a long time, we don't need to change the treaty. We can do everything within the Lisbon Treaty, no? And now that we have enlargement, they say, yeah, now we have to do the reforms. Yes, of course, now we have to do the reforms. But we don't need to change the treaties to do the reforms. And this is already circulating strongly. Be careful, huh? Watch out, because they are going to say that we write about the reforms, but not write about the treaty change. And why are they saying that? Basically, on the basis of Article 48.7, which is the general passerelle clause, which on paper allows, it is true, for many things to happen. For instance, you could switch to qualified majority voting in the Council, and you can even switch to ordinary legislative procedure, also using the passerelles, also in order to say, don't worry, Parliament, you also can get what you want. But we have to say a couple of things about that. First, this procedure is very complicated because it requires also that not any of the national parliaments blocks the initiative of these passerelles. So just one national parliament can block in a period of 6 months the passerelle either for qualified majority voting in council or for ordinary legislative procedure. Second, it's probably not by chance that in 14 years of validity of the Lisbon Treaty, the passerelles have never been applied. So it's probably not by chance. And as I tell, because these conservative experts are very much in tune with some member states in the Council, we have to also say that the proof is in the pudding. I mean, if they really think we don't need to change the treaty, why they haven't used this time to activate at least one passerelle? Not all of them, but one. I don't know, sanctions for foreign policy, or an easy one, quote unquote. No, but not even one. Second, even if you think you can use 48.7, there are things that you cannot do with 48.7, and this is also important. First, the question of initiate legislation for the Parliament. And this is very critical because the Parliament has always increased powers in every enlargement and reform, because enlargement has always coincided with reform. So we cannot accept that the powers of the European Parliament remain static with potentially 36 member states. Second, we have the question of monetary policy and fiscal policy here. The policy of the central bank of buying bonds in the secondary market. Yeah, I'm finishing with this. And the recovery plan have been done constitutionally, but really, really close to the limits of the treaty. And this is why we have constantly the questions with the Constitutional Court of Germany. So if we want to continue using monetary policy in a non-orthodox way and to consolidate the recovery plan as a permanent tool of the treaty, we cannot afford to do it without changing the treaty, because we run the risk again of these clashes with constitutional courts. And third and last, and this is very important from our political family, one big achievement of this report by Gabi is, and something that she knows very well, and she has been pushing for that, is the social progress protocol. This proposal includes it in the treaty. We cannot have this, which is very important for us as social democrats, this equality between the market freedoms and the social rights if we don't incorporate into the treaty. So I think we need, yes, we need to rebalance that, and we can only do it if we incorporate the social progress protocol into the treaty, which of course requires treaty change. So thank you very much. Passerelle clauses, general passerelle clauses, this is not going to help us. This is not going to help us with that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So you had a firework of proposals, ideas from theoretical approach to deliver this focus on common goods, to architecture, institutional affairs, and their link to policies. But this is now your opportunity to come in with comments, questions to our distinguished speakers, something you did find especially interesting here. Who is going to break the ice in the first panel for that? And I think
While we are waiting for the audience to come, but I must say that the panelists can also enter in dialogue between each other, okay? And I'm one of them, so that's why I'm coming with 2 or 3 questions. I have a question to you, because you are the living memory of different phases of building up the European projects. And when you go back to your experience with the conventions, my question for you is, what do you feel is changing on the way European democracy should work? In the representative side, but also in the participatory side. What is your feeling about this?
Yeah, very well.
And then
Question, yeah.
I have question for Giovanni, to give you the chance to elaborate on a very important distinction of 2 words which are floating around, which one is European sovereignty, another one is strategic autonomy. How do you make the difference?
very
So-
interesting questions where you could do a whole seminar about, but I think you is the first to answer his question.
Yeah, look, the first convention on the Charter of Fundamental Rights came out of the German presidency and the summit in Cologne, where after many decisions of the European Court of Justice on basic rights that are not, let's say, visible in the treaty at the time, the mandate was to have an enumeration of rights of EU citizens. And it looked rather technical. So there was not big attention. Yeah, we had all the parliaments, all the governments and the commission, but we had no civil society. Well, the courts have been a bit observing what we are doing, but there was not really a public awareness and debate. And then enumerating the rights that are in the treaties and what all member states have accepted as international conventions. We quickly came to a dynamic saying, look, this cannot be just a list, it has a concept. And then you see what the outcome was. Exciting insight dynamic of those who participated. The second convention, of course, was already more aware of constitutional treaty or European constitution. We know the campaigns that have been done not only by the federalists, and you had observer status for all those who have a public mandate, the social dialogue, the Committee of the Regions, the Committee of Social and so on Affairs Committee. And and your question is now if we get a new convention in 2024-5, we have to make the next step. At the time, there was the thinking about a first circle, those who have mandates, and then a second circle. But the inter-dialogue was rather, let's say, occasionally and not so strong. And we have to develop a new concept where the interaction is stronger and where we have to reflect who is in the first circle, if that is possible, that social partners and others can be part of the decision-making process and the reflection of a convention. I think that's new territory, but it has to be done.
Thank you very much for this question. I had to be a little brief perhaps on this point as I made my opening remarks. We didn't have so much time, but I take this opportunity because I think it should be clear that when we speak of European sovereignty and how institutional reforms can help bring about European sovereignty, we're not speaking of a legal or legalistic definition of sovereignty as the ultimate constitutional authority over a given territory. That remains, needless to say, with member states. We are speaking of a political and functional definition of sovereignty, seems to me, at the European level. That is the ability to set priorities, deliver results, and shape the future direction of this political organization, this unique political entity that is the European Union. So priority setting, delivering results, hence shaping the direction of change of this European Union. That is, it seems to me, what sovereignty is about and why, as I tried to mention, it is so important to have this capacity to define priorities, deliver results, meaning European public goods, so as to meet the expectations of citizens and therefore strengthen the legitimacy and credibility of the European Union. And by the way, it should be stressed, of member states. Sometimes there is this kind of contraposition as if strengthening the EU and the decision-making capacity at the EU level came to the detriment of national sovereignty or democratic legitimacy. But my question would be, what is the future of democratic legitimacy at the national level if EU member states are not capable of delivering on citizens' expectations, all the more so in this much more challenging and demanding international context? I don't think that national sovereignty and national democratic legitimacy has a particularly bright future in the medium and long term if we do not strengthen sovereignty and democratic legitimacy at the European level. It's not a zero-sum game, it's not an either-or, it is actually about a mutually reinforcing process of establishing decision-making authority at the European level for Europeans to be for member states to be better able to exercise their own national sovereignty in more effective ways. To second part, and to conclude, sovereignty and strategic autonomy. Now, strategic autonomy, of course, polarizing wording, contested. I think that the debate on strategic autonomy most of the times is of a pretty low quality. The classic response to strategic autonomy is, but Europe cannot defend itself on its own without NATO and the United States, and speaking of strategic autonomy may alienate the United States and therefore weaken NATO. Now, of course, it is a matter, of course, that NATO is central and foundational to European security, and the transatlantic partnership is also foundational to a number of things that we want to achieve, if possible, together. However, strategic autonomy is simply about autonomous, the ability to give yourself your own rules. And this should not be beyond the scope of ambition of a political entity representing 450 million people like the European Union, to ability to give yourself your own rules in ways that are not defined by others. That is primarily a political notion. And as such, I think that it should be understood as a sort of twin notion or an enabling condition for a proper understanding of European sovereignty. Now, of course, there is also a resource dimension. There is a material dimension. And of course, an understanding of strategic autonomy with a view to achieving European sovereignty entails that we need to pool our capabilities, of course, in the defense and military field, of course, in research and innovation, of course, in industrial policies. Does that mean weakening the transatlantic partnership? To be honest, I don't see a possible reason why that should or would be the case. Does it mean walking alone on the global stage? I don't see a reason why that should be the case. It means equipping and empowering the European Union to be a stronger actor on the world stage and a much stronger partner to the United States. In fact, I would conclude by turning the argument around, and I would say that a less sovereign and autonomous Europe is also a less transatlantic Europe over time, because the strength and reliability of the European Union as a partner in the transatlantic framework depends on the cohesion of the European Union and ability to deliver results that meet the citizens' needs and therefore contributes to the legitimacy of the European Union. If, from a transatlantic standpoint, we want a strong transatlantic partnership, we need a strong and more sovereign European Union. That would be my case.
That's a strong argument, but I also heard that Stefan wants to come back into the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you. When you take the theory of public goods seriously, it has an answer for sovereignty. It is the ownership of public goods. And the ownership of public goods is clearly distinguished by the externalities. Externalities are the effects that we impose on others by our own individual actions. So in a way, the way we have the European Union today is kind of a bit perverse, in the sense that those who are creating the externalities are also saying we are not giving away the sovereignty for citizens to decide how the externality created by others should be managed. What I'm suggesting really is to rethink our way of allocating responsibilities. Today, we have, let's say, if you take an apple, you can slice the apple vertically. So you get lots of slices, and that's what we have in Europe. Every level, the local, the national, the European level, have a word to say about what should happen. Or you say, well, the responsibilities are allocated to the level at which externalities exist. So if there are externalities that exist at the national level, that's the task for national governments. If you have externalities that happen for all European citizens across the board, then that is clearly a matter for European sovereignty. And so European sovereignty therefore means I own these public goods as an individual citizen, just as I own the public good on a national level. And on the other hand, it means also that I have a right to elect and decide a government and representatives who are running and managing and administrating these public goods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I have 3 people asking for the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Marco Schwarz. I work for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation's EU office here in Brussels. And I would like to address again this elephant in the room. Dominic mentioned that for me the convention we would need to implement all these really interesting and important proposals you make in the paper. But we know last time we had a convention with, I guess it was 15 member states and observers. This time we will have a convention with 27 member states. We will have also observers from candidate countries. And then we should take into account the conference on the future of Europe. So we might need also additional citizens panels and so on, which of course strengthens the democratic approach. But you know that it makes things much more complicated than 20 years ago. So what makes you so confident then, even if we could start the process by a simple majority in the council, this might be feasible from 2024, 25, that the results will not be kicked down the road or crushed like we have seen in the Netherlands and France back then in referenda. So Hungary would, of course, Orban would gladly have a referendum than deciding on the results of the next convention. So I would here like to see avenues how we make sure then the results will be implemented, or do we need to think in the end about, I don't know, a kind of refunding of the union, because we can see 27 plus observers, candidate countries will not be capable to go again this very long road and really important road. I'm in favor of all you're saying, but how to do it?
We will first collect some questions and then you will get some answers. I am also tempted to reply to that, but I think my colleagues too. It's your turn now, your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Yulia Paskevskaya. I'm from Ukraine, and I'm advisor of Minister of Justice of Ukraine, expert of human rights, and also I'm a researcher, a PhD. And thank you very much that you are noticed today about that we started a new time and new process, and Ukraine really has no opportunity to be in a part of European countries, and it's for us a big challenge, of course, because we are resilient, yes, but we are strong, but it's also because you are stay with us, and it's very important for us. And thank you for this more and more. Thank you. And my questions about civic society. Okay, now we discuss about changes and how needs these changes. Really, a lot of problems we have now, war and other things, changes geopolitics, and necessary reforms. But what kind of way you see in collaboration with civic society? Is it possible, or what direction you see? Because I think that civic society, and I'm looking to my country, to my Ukraine, that only thanks to civic society we stay strong and we more democracy, and this will give us more and more view that really civic society it should be a big key, yeah, in a democracy, and change these reforms according to these new rules. Maybe this is my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we had a third question. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Lukas Schäfer from the Free University of Brussels. Thank you for all the explanations and the statements. I wanted to come back to the general debate on the instruments for implementing reforms, so treaty changes and maybe alternatives that are discussed. MEP Ruiz de Vesa mentioned it with Article 84.7. But I personally, in debates, I often hear another article that is coming before in the treaty as a counter argument that is enhanced cooperation. And I wanted to know your opinion. What could be an argument that can be mobilized why we need treaty changes and not just enhanced cooperation? Of course, in the area of common foreign and security policy, it's more easy to argue it, but personally, I found it always really difficult in economic policy, for example, to argue why we really need treaty changes and why enhanced cooperation is not enough. So I wanted to hear what could be arguments that we could mobilize. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 3 very concrete questions. I heard Dominic who wanted to answer the first question, and then we will go around.
Well, thanks a lot. Yes, maybe I will tackle mostly the question by Marco, and in a way also answering the third question. No? Well, how to do it? Well, we are in the making, and let's not forget that we are not. So you are posing you're posing a valid question, which is how to organize a convention with 27, with candidates, and what happens if in the end one member state. Hungary is always mentioned, but you know there has been a political change in Poland, so I assume the situation in Hungary will not be the same forever. But okay, I take the point. One member state can block the process. But before that, we need to secure a very good majority next week in the parliament. This is very important, because if it's a narrow approval of the treaty, this is not going to be helpful. So this is step one. Second, we need that this report is transmitted to the European Council by the Council. The Spanish presidency has committed to do the transmission, so this in theory should happen, and there are more than 14 votes in the Council to do the transmission. But then we need the help of Charles Michel, because Michel is the one that has to put this in the agenda of the European Council, ideally in the meeting of the 15th of December. So those are important steps that have to happen. Once we have that, we need to have the majority in the European Council. I expect that the discussion could start on the 15th of December if it's put in the agenda, and before the European elections under the Belgian presidency, a decision is made, hopefully a positive decision. After we have done all that, which is a lot of work and a lot of political difficulties, we cannot take anything of this for granted. I think, yes, the convention will take time. We need to have all these actors in the game, but this is a medium-term process. We are aware of that, but we have to launch it as soon as possible. This is why I'm aiming for the 15th of December for this, and not to wait for everything for the Belgian presidency. The same way that enlargement will take time. So we will not have a union of 36 overnight, but we need to launch these processes in parallel, hand in hand, and as soon as possible. And then on the question of one member state blocking the whole thing at the end of the process, yes. But then is when, and this I link and I finish with that, with the question, the third question, when that happens is the moment to consider alternative ways of differentiated integration. That's the moment where the dilemma should be posed, because then that member state has to make a decision. Do you want to be with everyone else, or you want to be in a category of one? This is the moment to, I think, to face this dilemma, I will say. I totally agree, by the way, with the comments from the Ukrainian colleague on the role of civil society. And one thing to do there is to establish as soon as possible the European movement organization in Ukraine.
Thank you. Before I give over to you, who already is ready for that, I also wanted to come back to this question. Is it too complex with 27 member states to organize a convention? And I would say that not only, as Dominic said, the world is different to the Lisbon Treaty in terms of challenges, but the world is also different because we have elaborated new ways of working. We have seen the conference on the future of Europe with 800 citizens working very well. I was quite impressed about the working groups and the work, how it was done. And I have been an observer also in the last convention. And I have to say, this can be reflected in an intelligent structure of such a convention. And I think here we have much more experience than we had beginning of the years 2000. And this is why I'm quite convinced also how we would arrange working groups. We work in a include experts from Harvard in a debate. We have here a lot of things that we couldn't anticipate when the last convention was done. So I'm quite positive. I agree with Dominic, the most important step is in the European Council. It is the courage to do it. And that was the problem after the experience in the past. And I think the conference was also a way to say a key difference to the last convention is that we gave a much stronger role in defining the areas of change by involving the citizens. I think also, as you said, we will find different ways involving the citizens also in this process, or at least having feedback loops between what is happening there and citizens. And I still remember at the last convention, the involvement of the social partners was not foreseen at all. It was because of a phone call of Emilio Gabalho from the ETUC at that time to Guy Verhofstadt, who under the Belgian presidency was leading it, decided we do it and proposed it. And I think from this experience also that we know the step is also takes a lot of courage from having results of a convention to have discourses in 27 member states, and involvement of citizens, social partners and others will also help to shape these debates. But I will hand over also to you, who was very eager to answer here.
Now, most of it has been answered. Let's say I would agree with Julia that we should use the power of civil society. Civil society has grown enormously in the last years, and you have to use public opinion enshrined in NGOs and other entities for stronger Europe, a more citizen-centered EU. And I think since we speak about public goods, and we heard from Colin, Stefan, that it are things that concern everybody. So I think there is a good case to empower civil society before and around the next convention. And then I agree with you, Gabi, that an intelligent structure is able to have a bigger forum, and maybe we have to think about the first circle and the second circle, and how the feedback and the interaction can be done. Let's say if the second circle, whatever component it is, has an opinion, that the first circle has to reply and not only put it in the waste bin. Such things can work. Yeah. And enhanced cooperation, why was it not done? Because it meets the same, let's say, obstacles like the passerelle clause, and the will is not there to do it. In tax policy, if you have, let's say, a new tax for 9 members and the others don't have it, they have imbalances in the common market. So it was a nice idea, but it is not flying.
It is, and I remember I participated in one when I worked in the German ministry in the social field. And it had a good start and a couple of member states, but in the end, we didn't manage to do it. That was, and a lot of member states are willing to do it, but that sometimes, I mean, it shows the limitations. But I think also Stefan wants to come back into this debate, if I understood it right.
I understand that the debate here now is about how can we change the treaty, and this is important. But I think we should not forget that there is also an issue of ratification. If I take the theory of public good, then it means that the ratification is with respect to those people who are concerned, the owners of the public goods, which means the ratification should be at the level of the European Union and not at the level of member states. I think it is important to insist on that, especially after the disaster we had with the Treaty on European Constitution last time, when 2 member states, France and the Netherlands, voted against and killed the project, while actually the total number of votes and electors having expressed themselves, including Spain and Ireland and Luxembourg, and I don't know who else was involved with it at the time, the total number of votes was in positive, was for accepting of the constitutional treaty. So the point here is that it should really be a referendum at the European level, taking all member states, all votes together from all member states. And then if there are individual states where the majority is not in favor, well, then they can consider what they want to do. It might be of interest to remember that the German constitution, which nowadays everyone seems to accept, was rejected by Bavaria, and Bavaria joined the Federal Republic of Germany despite having rejected the initially the constitution. So I think these are ways how this can work out. Here in the United States, there were several states like Rhode Island next door to Massachusetts where I am, which initially rejected the American Constitution and later joined. So these things are possible, but I think what is important is to give legitimacy to the owners of the public goods individually so that they in total can actually set what is the ratification of any new constitution.
Thank you very much. Quite a radical thought here, but also with reference to history. We discussed that quite long between the co-rapporteurs and came up with not such a radical, but a bit a radical proposal here. Okay, I think we have to finish this panel. We have another very interesting panel to come up. So I really wanted to thank everyone here on the panel for the interesting insights and also the debates and answers to the questions. Thank you for joining the debate here. And I will hand over to Maria now for the second panel, focusing especially also on policies. Thank you very much.
We are moving right away to the second panel of this symposium. I'm saying this also for those who are following us online. And the main topic of this second panel is exactly about how can we increase the European Union capacity to decide and to act when coping with citizens' concerns. So I will be joined by other colleagues, members of the high-level group behind this report. And yes, very good. So I will introduce you then one by one. I know. Yeah. And so let me start by this very simple idea. Recently, we had a Franco-German report calling for some target changes in the treaties, mainly to address enlargement as an imperative. And look, I fully agree that in front of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, enlargement has become a political, geopolitical, and moral imperative. From my viewpoint, this is very clear. Nevertheless, the reasons to introduce some changes in the treaty are these ones, but also others which have to do with citizens' concerns. Our approach was exactly a systematic one to identify which are the new European public goods we should be able to deliver in order to meet citizens' concerns. At the heart of this approach, we have a very simple idea, is that European public goods are necessary to answer to the requests coming from citizens, but these European public goods should also be shaped democratically by European citizens. And this should be the basis of European sovereignty for the next phase of the European project. So this is at the heart of this report. And that's why now we are going to concrete examples of European policies. And we will, first of all, focus on those who have to do with our way of life when it comes the digital transformation, the green transition, the social dimension of our lives, but also the implications of the health policy, particularly after the pandemic's experience. And in all these areas, I will ask our experts to tell us more about which should be the new European public goods to be delivered, and with which means regarding the way to finance these European public goods, and how can we better decide and implement these European public goods. Well, we have conducted quite thorough legal work to show that in several cases, we need in fact to upgrade the competences of the European Union. Example, if we speak about issues of security, not only defense, but food security, cyber security, we need to move to upper level of European competences. The same applies to industrial policy or health policy where several measures, they need to move to complementary competences of the European Union towards shared competences. This is an important transformation regarding some provisions of the treaties. And finally, we need to introduce qualified majority voting and co-decision in also particular policies or segments of these policies. This is also very clear, for instance, when we speak about a European Health Union. So I have the pleasure now to introduce some other colleagues being part of this high-level group, and we'll start to address the digital transformation. And you know, perhaps a surprise for some of us, but the Lisbon Treaty doesn't have the word digital. So, and we are in a digital era. So this is another demonstration that we need to update the EU treaties. So this is my pleasure to introduce Guillaume Clossin. And Guillaume Clossin is the executive president of Europa Nova, so a renowned think tank in France, and also involved in different operations, starting, Guillaume, with us working together to bring about the Lisbon Treaty. I can never forget the moment you visit me in Lisbon, coming from the French presidency, and you told me, Maria, this time we can overcome the disaster we had in France and rescue a big part of the constitutional treaty.
Maria, it was in April 2007, before the French presidency.
Yeah, but you are already prepared.
And yes, I prepared, but I was not in position at the time. But it was key that there was only one solution, and that the French president was a tool of history. Anyway, once that said, if we look at the wider history, trade has been the driving force for international relations up to, let's say, 2010. But if we think about the past 10 years, it was not anymore trade which was the driving force, but geopolitics. And behind geopolitics, there is technology and technological leadership. And behind technological leadership, there is digital, platform, and AI. Trade is an EU exclusive competence. Digital is nowhere. But at the same time, as you said 20 years ago, digital was not a topic. We were at the beginning of internet, and nobody understood that there was a long-term revolution with something which was completely unexpected, which is that these new digital technologies, which include internet, platform, AI, blockchain, digital quantum, etc., were going to make disappear frontiers, geographical frontier, and in some years, linguistic frontier. And from that, it's a huge revolution, but it's also a revolution of our way of thinking. Because this technology allows us to go beyond what was a major difficulty for the European development, which were linguistic and geographical frontiers. And they can allow us to think completely differently the production of public and common goods. And this is a revolution. And so the question for Europe, which was the last 500 years at the eve of innovation, is are we going to leverage this technology to go on innovating and inventing the next step of democracy and the next step of power, or are we abandoning the game? So what we propose in this report is to make digital policy a shared competence And with regard to the objective of autonomy, I will not speak about strategic autonomy, but as Giovanni said, autonomy is our capacity to decide and to define our rules. We consider that we should consider this aspect as an exclusive competence of the EU. So that's a very strong proposal that we are making now. So, of course, which is important to understand is digital technology are transforming all our realities in social life, in economic life, in political life, in geopolitical life. And up to now, what we did do was only regulating. We use the internal market to regulate this technology. And I know well this topic because I prepared the report which paves the way to the DSA and the DMA. But the idea now is to have a systemic approach and being able to leverage this technology to transform Europe and to produce differently existing or new public goods. That's the challenge we have. What are the specificities of digital technology? So they kill traditional frontier, they kill linguistic frontier. Second, all activities of our society can be radically transformed and very quickly. Third, there is a need of critical mass and of critical size for data in order to leverage the potential of AI. And you know that this is the topic of the year and the topic of the decade. No country, even France and Germany combined, have the resource today to do that. And fourth, the implementation of this technology obey to civilizational objectives. If we think about China, it's the implementation of society of surveillance. If we think about the US, it's a civilization of maximization of economic value and extraterritorial influence. And for Europe, the question is what kind of objective we want behind. And for me, they are very clear. We want a human and citizen-centric society, and we want the production of public goods. So clearly, that's split for a European competence with regard to digital technology. What could we do with digital technology? I just want to give you some very quick example. First of all, an access to this technology to everybody, and this should be a right. Second of all, we should plead for a right to a safe and cyber-secure environment. Third, we should plead for citizen data sovereignty. Fourth, we could consider the development of a multinational, multilingual European public space. This is now possible. Fourth, if we think about health, we could consider of a right to have a very high biological diagnosis for everybody because technology allows it, etc. So you see there are many potential for this technology to invent new rights, to create public goods. And if we don't decide to leverage them now, nobody will do it for us. What we see is India, China, the US have digital platform strategy, and we have not. And we have not because there is no digital single market and because we have no ambition. But without platform, because platforms are driving the economy, we will not be independent in terms of economy and development. So now it's time to go ahead And I think it's time to consider digital technology as a new chapter of the treaty.
Many thanks, Guillaume. I think you could illustrate very well why we do need a new chapter in the treaties dealing with the digital transformation. And you identify bolder objectives if we take into account the current EU policy for the digital area. Now let's move to a second fundamental challenge, which is the climate and environmental change. And I'm very pleased to introduce Mercedes Bresso, a member of our high-level group, but also a member of the European Parliament. And Mercedes, tell us about this, please.
Thank you. I apologize. I prefer to speak in Italian, so it's clearer because it's a complex subject, so I prefer to speak in Italian.
So, I think, as Stéphane Collignon reminded us, and all the rapporteurs, in fact, have done so, I think this report and our discussions are very important. We've all worked on it. Our reporters here in the European Parliament have been working on the reform of the treaty, and our role is to try to find a way to explain how to subdivide competences, for example, public goods, which I think for citizens would be intuitively clear, explaining that the public goods that are goods that cannot be provided by the private sector but by the public administration mainly, but they can only be provided by those who are able to do so at the right level. Now, I think people understand this, and even more understand how necessary Europe is, especially for certain issues which have been discussed at great length, and the work that Europe will have to do to decide what institutional reforms are necessary. But in European architecture, it is important for us to understand what public goods must be provided by the EU, because if not, they will not be properly provided or not serve their purpose. On the other hand, for the environment, Europe already has a basic competences. All European legislation is prepared by Europe, and fortunately, because if not, the single market would be totally fragmented by different legislation. But we still are lacking the element which would really finalize this competence, that is international negotiations. So though all our basic legislation is coming through by Europe, it would be understandable that competences in negotiations on climate change in general, negotiating all aspects of environmental reform, going above and beyond climate change, but all these competences should be attributed to the EU. Now, this is a point which was discussed at great length, and we suggested to take this on in the reform of the treaties, which we will be proposing, or we hope to be bringing forward as the Parliament through this convention. Having competence for all the green transition, then competences are on one, having the EU having these competences for international negotiations is crucial. But there's another issue that I have been working on for years. I've been working on the economy of the environment, and it's an issue that in reality it would be a good idea to have a cross-cutting competences in areas which are not yet, but maybe, a main competence of the EU. For example, the in housing industry, energy, also agriculture and farming, where there is some EU competence, but in fact, all the necessary environmental policies, which will affect many sectors, the policies are cross-cutting, dealing with many sectors of the economy, but we won't be able to enact them if they are not a competence in the competence of the EU. So we need transversal, cross-cutting competences. So this would be a public good, and I think that we mentioned this point in the treaty, but of course the issue of the EU of energy, European Energy Union, which was negotiated, but we've been negotiating on it. It's a fundamental element, as this is a basis for the environmental transition and any development policies. All this is influenced by energy, so the radical change in energy sources necessary for environmental change cannot be a principal competence of the EU, but we would need to enact the principle of subsidiarity, because we have all sorts of major legislation, and we cannot invade this thing which we've had a tendency to do. We can't invade member states' competences too much, because they have better possibilities of enforcing certain legislation, and because they're more familiar with their regions and their economies. So the other issue that we've agreed that must that where the EU's competence must be increased is the defense policies, strategic autonomy, but also, as we've seen, all productive sectors in Europe. Europe is an open market, so they don't want to establish too many duplicative policies, but we've seen things, what's going on in Ukraine, and we've seen it in the Israeli-Hamas war, is changing the market for energy sources. Hopefully not too long. Hopefully in future we won't have to be using fossil fuels, on which part of the world depends for their energy supply, or the major part of their energy supply. But strategic autonomy also concerns food products and basic raw materials, commodities throughout various sectors. Now, in the pandemic, we saw that there was a shortage of, for example, certain commodities, steel, even basic material for medicines, whole basic products that impeded development, raw material, this whole strategic autonomy in economy, which is an important aspect from the digital transition to everything else. We've talked about this, and we've there's the social dimension, which is important. Obviously, the green transition cannot go through if we do not have instruments to react to difficulties of families, especially families, but businesses, to get aligned, adapt their homes, their way of life to new requirements and new legislation. So the social dimension did not, at this time, wasn't in the Treaty of Rome. It wasn't in the Lisbon Treaty. The EU did not have exclusive competence, but we need to have Europe be able to intervene intervene in issues which are important to citizens. I think I can leave it at that, and if you have any questions, why, feel free to put them. Thank you.
Grazie mille.
Thank you very much.
Now we are exactly moving, you pass the word, to the social policy. And this is my pleasure to present another author of our report, Robin Huguenot-Noël, working in the European University Institute. And he was in charge of drafting the chapter on social, but he's also a very good expert on economic governance. I'm sure that you can make the bridge and tell us more about this.
Thanks a lot. Maria, thanks for convening, and also thanks for our intellectual exchanges over the course of the process. And a final thanks would be for kind of, breaking a certain walk, a dreamer's walk that is actually often associated with social Europe. When you start talking about social Europe, a lot of people start thinking, this is really, this kind of dreamer's walk. And actually, over the last few years, you have made it. I think other visionary women have made it, other visionary men have made it, that I see also in the room, to a contended battle. And I think this is today a highly contended battlefield, and I think this is for the best. And I will explain one. I mean, today, if you think of social Europe, basically you see two main sides kind of opposing it. The first one comes from basically a kind of, I would call them a trade-off crowds, right? When you see, basically welfare spending would be bad for competitiveness, for jobs creation, it's prone to moral hazard, and so on and so forth. Like the kind of rhetoric that we've been hearing for a while, and that always comes back after crisis and in fiscal consolidation times. Another crowd that you see is the one of welfare chauvinists, and basically there you see more and more also this kind of strong pushbacks to say, the social Europe is a threat, and this is potentially hurting welfare diversity and so on. So I mean, basically the kind of debates that you see in the political world, you also see them in the academic world, and they are very strongly represented. And my point today, and I think also in trying to advance treaty changes, is to say there is a middle point that is very underexplored. This is one that has been coined a bit in the past as well in the terms of European social union. And what I'm trying to explore a bit more is the one of a reinsurance union. I think this is one of the things that we learned during the pandemic, is that there was scope for the EU to act as a reinsurance union, as a holding environment, second line of defense for the welfare state. Well, this has been very effective. If you look at the recovery plan, the SURE initiatives, and so on and so forth, one of the main issues that we have today is that most of these initiatives may not stick, and so there is a need to look at how we could make them stick. I mean, when you look at just a few examples of why it may not, ECB is tapering again. Now there is the economic governance review. There was some kind of attempts to have some clauses for considering social spending as a social investment as well. This is also kind of really backfired from the kind of more economic stakeholders, and so basically stronger needs than ever to bring back this kind of reinsurance union agenda. I want to develop 3 points for why I think this is crucial, 3 different kind of very specific changes that could be made to the treaties based on different concepts. The first one is for the EU to act as a holding environment for a national welfare state. The second one, so that's more of a kind of EU funds, EU economic governance side. Second one is having a legal arsenal for modern social security provisions. I think this is also extremely important, that we also bring back the theme of social security and the EU's contribution to it at the EU level. I think Frank van den Broek has been trying to do that in the last few weeks. I think this is very welcome, and there are ways to explore what could be done in the treaties to do so. Third one is to improve the funding capacity for the EU to also help foster universal basic services also in national welfare states. I'll start with the first point, which is on the holding environment for the national welfare states, and is again very much linked to the funds and economic governance side, as you suggested. Why wait? I mean, it's basically the main questions that we are facing, the higher risks, the higher cost that we have been witnessing during the Great Recession, that we haven't been seeing during the pandemic, is also because basically we didn't wait. But if you look at the financial markets reaction, if you're treaties are not ready, are not allowing you to have fast provisions to respond. If you wouldn't have the RF, if you wouldn't have SURE, basically the first thing you do is you have very high costs, and they are increasing by the day because financial markets are attacking your union, they are attacking the solidarity potential. And so as a result, basically, if you wait, if you don't have this kind of legal basis to allow for progress to happen, the cost is going to be higher and higher and higher. And so the main point is basically we need to look at the treaties to change them now, so that whenever this potential crisis happen, we can see concretely how to address them. I think there are very targeted changes that I'd focus on two right now. I mean, there have been other proposals, and happy to discuss later. First one is having a permanent facility for financial assistance. That would mean looking at the budgetary rules, so Article 122 and 125. Again, this is something we could discuss. The second one, which is also to stress the social cost that crisis can have. If you think in terms of human capital wasted when people go on unemployment, I mean, think of youth unemployment rates for 5 years in Spain, all this human capital completely wasted. How to avoid that? And then we have to think about along the lines of the SURE instruments that was raised, I mean, that was introduced, where you try to maintain, I mean, to preserve the capacity of people to stay in their jobs when these crises are happening, and the EU can provide this kind of support for national welfare states to be able to do that. And also having a bit more of a focus on unemployed. I mean, there's also a lot of people that if they can be helped in these situations, if the unemployment systems are under pressure during this crisis, that shouldn't be an issue for the youth, to support them for this transition, also with, basically training, accompaniment, and so on and so forth. And I think this is really another major element that could be amended through, Title 9 on the employment article. I think to have an employment retention fund could be an idea, including these kind of two aspects. But again, happy to discuss it further. I think as far as the funds are concerned, I just think not to forget the importance of cohesion policy that has been also associated with a lot of important social provisions in the last decade. And I think this is, again, an area to open. I'm just leaving it now open, as I'm leaving open the questions on how to change the European semester. Just to move on the second point. The second point is on the legal arsenal for comprehensive and modern social security provisions. I think this is really one point where we realize there are very important treaty limits, and the first one is in the way we define workers. The definition of workers today basically doesn't account for all these kind of jobs that you may see, many of your friends, family, and so on now actually involved in. Self-employed workers are not being recognized as workers, or very difficultly so, because you have to go through very different legal basis to be able to make them enter into the picture of your legal provisions at EU level. And so basically this is not satisfying. And the second main issue on social security provision is, again, we've been mentioning it a couple of times, unanimity leads to a lot of provisions, a lot of interesting proposals being watered down. And so to avoid this kind of minimal common denominator, there is clearly a need to look at Article 153, so there are different alineas. Again, I'm not going to go through the kind of technicalities of it, but just very clearly that the European Parliament, that any parliament should be associated into discussions on social policies is such a basic fact at national level. Why would it not also be the case at European level? This is, if we're talking about democratic deficits and so on and so forth, I mean, this is really the very first step that should be taken. And so I think this is, kind of one of the main important points on this one. Third and final element that I think is also essential in terms of this kind of three pillars of a reinsurance union is the funding capacity to support provisions of universal public services at the national level. So today we have quite a few interesting initiatives that have been popping up in the last few years. You think of child guarantee, the youth guarantee. I mean, they have shown that the EU can also contribute to providing these kind of holding environments for national member states to invest in childcare, to invest in active labor market policy provisions, in active aging. I mean, in basically in this kind of really universal social services that are also a key pillar of a social pillar, right? I mean, that I also mentioned in the social pillar. And my proposal here would be just very blunt, but also looking at the funding side. I mean, we have some kind of capacity that we can have through these kind of guarantees granted by member states. But as long as you don't have, a fiscal capacity to raise, so raising taxes, you don't have also the redistribution happening through the revenue side. So you can focus on the spending side, and there's a lot you can do through the spending side, but you also need the revenue side to make it comprehensive. So that would be the kind of three main pillars. Again, very happy to discuss the kind of specifics if of interest. But just to conclude finally on word on in general, where we need to move now, the risk is today, I mean, we've been taking advantage of, a couple of years where we had low interest rates, we had, a macroeconomic environment that was allowing for a certain convergence of ideas in terms of, productive potential of social policies. This environment is growingly disappearing, and there will be, people coming back on the idea of, cutting down in social provisions. And if we don't have an alternative kind of consideration of how it could be done, I think that, the risks are and the limits of the treaties are going to be higher and higher over the coming years. So get involved and try and see how best to do so. Thanks.
Robin. This very comprehensive view about what is the situation in social policy paves the ground very clearly for a particular social policy which was in our minds, particularly during the pandemics, proving that we really need to move to a new stage under the umbrella of European Health Union. So this is my pleasure to have among our authors a former European Commission of Health, Vytenis Andriukaitis, and such a visionary commissioner, and also a member of a previous convention. So tell us your thoughts about this, please.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, colleagues. For me, it's much easier because previous speakers touched all questions related to health. Absolutely. Climate change, air pollution, and premature death. Where you know that about 500 million we are losing every year, our Europeans, because of premature death, because of air pollution, and death. It's real. It's real. If you should to address issues with premature death, we need to have in our hands instruments to reduce air pollution. But climate and air pollution is a really European public good. No one country can solve those problems related to air pollution. It means that they should think about their own citizens on the ground. Of course, speaking about digital, e-prescription, e-patient records, possibilities to create European health data space is about digital. And of course, speaking about social. And social and health are so close interlinked. I spent 5 years being European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety. For food safety, I can tell you, I spent a lot of meetings together with ministers of agriculture. Agriculture ministers are gathering in Brussels maybe 12 times per year because they have a lot of questions, especially when you remember African swine fever. Of course, food safety issues were very broad, and from farm to fork, I managed as chief veterinarian officer of European Union. But when I ask myself how many times I am discussing about health with health ministers, 1 time per year or 2 times per year. Can you imagine this huge asymmetry when we are speaking about possibilities to gather sit together around the table and discuss issues related to concrete areas? And if you can ask me, can you help member states to address shortages with vaccines if, for example, measles outbreak, or other outbreaks? I don't only have only one instrument to call to minister in Germany, to call. Maybe you can help Romania, maybe you have something. Why? Because I have no tools in my hands. Because constitutional asymmetry enshrined in Lisbon Treaty absolutely clearly shows us that in the area of food safety have a lot of powers, and they have 2 billion euros per year. In area of public health, I have 75 million per year, and only compliment, only coordinate, only ask, only encourage, and that's all. And but if we are speaking about medicines, we do not have one single market in medicines. We have 27 different markets related to medicines. And if you have child which is suffered from rare disease in Lithuania, and innovative treatment was placed in Germany, you can compensate or reimburse this medicine with very high price. Otherwise, you can wait minimum 7 years when such medicine will be more and more provided to all 20. We see second-hand Europeans related to healthcare and cure. And when I ask member states, are you capable to deliver treatment to people with rare diseases? No one country is capable to deliver treatment to people with genetically determined diseases. No one, including Germany. We have about 30 million people suffering from rare diseases. But fragmented issues, separate and possibilities, and EU has no powers to do something because limits are enshrined in Lisbon Treaty. Lisbon Treaty is clear. Article 168 is absolutely clear. It's K&Q is a competence of member states. It's a mistake because you have competence, but you have no chance to deliver treatment to your own ordinary people. What about your competence? Colleagues, why are you lying? It's nothing with your competence. It's a miracle, it's not competence. And when we tried to establish European reference networks treating people with rare diseases, we spent a lot of time encouraging member states to cooperate. In the beginning, it was 8 countries, then 14, and it took a lot of time. And only in 2017, we delivered on a voluntary basis, establishing European reference network for people, and only for 24 pathologists. But if you are speaking about the big data, if you are speaking about possibilities to develop innovative treatments or personalized treatment, why you are speaking about big data if you in Germany have only about 90 million inhabitants, in France also about 90, in Spain? But big data requires big actors because, big data requires a lot of gene sequencing, a lot of millions of genomic information. And how you can compete in development of innovative treatments or innovative with US or China or India? They have billions of data. We need only one way. We need to have pan-European approach in this area. We need to have pure European goods in the area of advanced treatments on the area of sun. I can tell you that now I see a lot of arguments, and health is very important hook for all of us. No one nationalist, no one populist, no one conservative and deny questions related to health. Why? Because citizens' expectations, current citizens' expectations to have more European public goods in health are very high. Eurobarometers in last 3 years shows that health is on first top one, second top one, the third position in Eurobarometer. And Conference on the Future of Europe has also asked really politicians. They include that we need to amend Article 4 on Treaty on the Functioning of the EU to include health and healthcare among shared competences, promoting better health by acting in the intersection between health and environment, reinforcing healthcare systems with access to affordable healthcare for all. Those ideas are raised by concepts on the future of Europe. It means that people are asking all of us, let's do more, and let's address issues. Let's overcome limits in Lisbon Treaty, because now you see a real constitutional asymmetry between, for example, shared competences in agriculture and situation with public goods. Only small, line which can help us to address issues with pandemia about public health threats, and then decision of public health threats was changed today with regulation of public health threats. Okay, but it's very small one. It's not enough to have some enough capacities to address issues. And of course, also, I can tell you that we need to see health as an aim enshrined in the Lisbon Treaty, not as an ancillary issue as it is today. We need to see how can we really use word union. Of course, monetary and economic union is enshrined in treaty. Customs union is enshrined because it's internal market. When we are using word union, we know that those unions are enshrined in Lisbon Treaty, and we have exclusive competences and shared competences. But when you are using word European Health Union, sorry, it's only complementary. It's only coordination, supplementation, and that's all. We discuss in very detailed manner about European Health Union, a blueprint for generations. We propose here 3 scenarios. How can we move forward addressing people needs in health? Scenario A is meant to act as business as usual. Scenario C is to act with secondary legislation, but it's very long, time-consuming. And scenario C is to improve, to insert health and European Health Union into Lisbon Treaty. And why I am arguing about possibilities to be courageous and to go into, into debates and invite all who are against possibilities to improve Lisbon Treaty. We need targeted changes in Lisbon Treaty. And of course, we need limited convention on those targeted changes which should be enshrined in treaty. And health is common denominator which can unite all forces in European Parliament and around European Union member states, because I see no one who will oppose issues to use health as real, a real hook opening these debates about new European Convention. Thank you.
Many thanks, Vytenis. I would say that if there is a policy field where this is obvious that we need to upgrade the EU treaties, is exactly the health, because everybody went through an incredible experience with the pandemics, and everybody can understand that to limit the European Union just to complementary competences is completely below what we need. So we need to upgrade to the so-called shared competencies. So this is a great conclusion for this panel. Now I would like to open for a debate involving the audience, and you can also come with the cross-cut questions. So I'm inviting those from the audience to come in. Yes. So please introduce yourself and come with your comment or question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lukas Schäfer from the Free University of Brussels. Thank you to all the panelists. I have a question for Mr. Huguenot Noël about another aspect of social policy, social Europe, not directly about the European Insurance Union, but it's not completely disconnected, I think. But it's more on wages and especially the future of collective bargaining and on the European level and the role of the social partners. And I guess especially for us as a progressive political family, the role of the trade unions. What should we change? How can we assimilate them to targeted treaty changes? I was thinking maybe about, for example, a reform of the social dialogue, making the agreements automatically becoming council decisions, but in your opinion, what could be ways to include the social partners and especially the trade unions in targeted treaty changes? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions coming? While I'm waiting, I also have some 2 or 3 questions for the panelists. One for the digital, because Guillaume, you came with a very bold idea saying somehow that if we Europeans were not able to develop our own key platforms, we cannot have European sovereignty on the digital transformation. So if you can explain a little bit more in detail why you are saying this, this will be helpful. Then look, I have a question also to Mercedes Bresso, because we are going to a new COP very soon. And it makes a big difference if in the COP negotiations, again, dramatic negotiations as we know, the European Union is able to come up with a united voice. So what do you think should be proposed regarding treaty updates to make sure that the European Union comes with united voice in the international negotiations about climate? This is my question. And then I have a question on the social, which is the following. Because, Robin, in a certain moment, you referred the role of cohesion policy, which of course remains extremely important policy with a lot of financial resources. Nevertheless, my question for you is, once we start launching the European Pillar of Social Rights, from my viewpoint, something fundamental has changed. Because the European social pillar is based on the concept of European citizenship. This is for European citizens. And therefore, social policy is no longer only for the lagging behind regions. European social policies is for all European citizens. And from my viewpoint, this has major implications. So if you can elaborate on this, would be also great. So do you want to start? And then from the audience again, please feel free to come with more comments or questions.
Well, there is the idea that we Europeans are not able to develop our own platform. I think it's a wrong idea, but I want to explain why platforms are very, very important. Global platforms are very, very important because they structure the organization of the economy and potentially the organization of all industries. So if we accept not to have our platform, we accept that the rules of our economy and our industry are defined by others. And it means that we have, in fact, zero sovereignty. So without independent European platform, we have no sovereignty. China has platform, the US has platform, Emirates, they have developed their own platform using American technology, and Indian, they are working to develop their digital public infrastructure. And we are nowhere. So we speak about sovereignty, about strategic autonomy, but the thing which is structuring the economy of tomorrow are platform. And it's not a big investment. There was some assessment about that. It was a matter of investing 20 billion euro a year. And at the moment, we have lost the competition for general platform, but we have not lost the competition for sectorial platform. We can develop platform for the media. This was something we proposed when I was director of the EBU 10 years ago. It was not a high cost, but with the rules of competition, it was very difficult to do. We could develop platform for health, and we could start with developing high-quality biological diagnosis for everywhere, because we need data. We need data, and when we speak about the need of data, is we need a diversity of data which go much beyond the national state. That's the issue. Otherwise, we are nowhere. The problem we have nowadays is that we say, okay, but we can win the competition for AI. But the fact is, the leverage for AI is platform. So AI somehow is there to complement the platform force. And we may say, but platform, okay, but we will find solution to avoid platform. But they are structuring the economy for the next 3 or 4 decades. And as we said earlier today, in terms of research and development, we are nearly nowhere. So that's why it's very, very important. In addition to that, we can also invent the next step of our democracy, because platform could help us to create a multinational, multilingual dialogue. The role of interpreter will remain, but we have capacities and technological capacity to allow everybody to speak and understand in his language, thanks to automation. And this will come. And if it is not a European initiative, it will be a Korean initiative. So let's be clear. We need to be bold. We need to be bold because otherwise, whatever we say in terms of autonomy, in terms of capacity to decide by ourselves, is an illusion. And unfortunately, technology and digital are the main driver of the globalization nowadays. And they are the main driver of power. And it is because we are absent of this competition that our leverage on international relations is weaker and weaker.
I think very well explained. Yeah. Many thanks. Do you want to come in?
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, as you know, Maria, in our proposal, we have a exclusive competence on climate change international negotiation. So the idea is when we go abroad to negotiate, is only the European Union will speak for all. But it's clear that probably with the time we will have, if we win, to have a convention and to change the treaties and to ratify the treaties, this will not be ready for the new COP, at least for the first, the next one, perhaps also the second one. In this case, we could do as we did, for example, for health. It was not a competence, but we acted as. So we could have an agreement which a delegation guided by the European Union, and where is the European Union to speak for others, for all. The others, all the delegation will discuss, will take a decision, because it's clear in a meeting you arrive with a proposal, after we have to decide for changes, for agreement with the others. So the delegation will be done by also the member state, but only the European Union could speak. This could be a transition situation if we agree to go to exclusive competence for the future on the international negotiation. I think that is valuable for all the negotiation. Actually, it is for the single market, for the, because this is a competence of the European Union, it's not for other also international meetings. So if I can make a general comment, I think that it's probably a problem to have a horizontal division of competencies. In fact, is not, we have nothing which has not an important part of decision which will be better for the European Union. So the idea could be to have international negotiation, general rules attributed to the European Union for all the matters, almost all the matters. And to have a real work on subsidiarity and proportionality to avoid that this general competence for the real European question became an invasion of all the competence of the states, because this is the risk and the problem. So I think we could, as FEPS, work on this idea. It's difficult to have something completely not competence of the European Union. Because in fact, when you ask a citizen, they tell this should be done by the European Union, but they don't think that all. But they think that the general, the important measure for all have to be decided at the European level. And after, the state will do all the other rules, main they will realize. But this is difficult, perhaps for the moment. I don't think it will be possible in the convention if we get to the convention. But we have to reflect on this change of perspective. In fact, in a federal, also in a quasi-federal state, in all the subject, we have the necessity to a role of the federal state. This is the federal government, the federal institution. This is, for me, the problem. We need to reflect very in depth about this, because I think that in this moment, for example, with an excess of regulation, we are discussing for environmental question only on regulation. There are no directive but regulation. So it's very impositive from the European Union, the regulation. And this is a risk. This is a risk, because in fact, when you will tell exclusive competence of climate change, they will think that you will do what we are doing now. That is all the competence. The Union occupy all the place. And it's also the fear for social and health question, which are very sensible for the national states. So I think that we should reflect better on the subsidiarity, proportionality, on how to avoid this occupy all, which is a bit the problem in this moment of the European legislation. Too much in details, which will provoke a resistance from the states. So, but this is another for another book, another reflection. But we have really to reflect on this, because otherwise it's difficult to propose new competencies if there is the risk of an invasion, too big invasion from the European Union.
Mercedes Mendes, thanks for raising this issue. You are a very experienced legislative actor in the European Union, and I think you are completely right. And by the way, our report was careful about this, because we always assume that the European Union architecture is a sui generis one, and is based on a multi-level governance system. Yeah. And so the solutions we are advocating are respecting the nature of the European Union as a multi-governance system. I'd like really to take the opportunity to underline this. Now, what about my question on the social? What can you tell us?
Thanks a lot for the two questions. I mean, and I think wages is indeed critical. It's also very interesting to see that, you know, you may well be aware, and for those who would not, there was this adequate minimum wage directive being voted upon that required incredible involvement at very different levels of creativity, because actually, if you look at the provisions of the treaty, pay, collective bargaining is, I mean, basically excluded. I mean, one part excludes pay, and I mean, EU legislation on pay and collective bargaining, but there are also other provisions that would allow for other EU contributions to it. So this is, I mean, clearly there is one article which is to be discussed. I mean, it's this alinea 5 of the article 153. Why should it be discussed? And I think, you know, right now there is a proceeding, legal proceeding launched by Denmark against the EU for this directive precisely. And if you look at, you know, the promotion of collective bargaining, and I mean, the most potential positive impact it can have, if you look at a country like Poland, it can be extremely important. I mean, for a lot of especially Central and Eastern European countries where the levels are much lower than in the rest of Europe, can be very important. I just saw this morning, you know, an academic paper on the role of Solidarność in, you know, transforming Poland, transforming the Polish welfare state today in a way that is very different from the one in Hungary, precisely because Solidarność could still be involved even with, you know, an alternative party leadership, and this is extremely important. And I think we should not allow for, you know, Denmark's fears or Danish fears to be able to preclude then. An update of social standards in Poland, for example. And so this is why these provisions in particular should be reopened. That doesn't mean, you know, moving straight away to qualified majority voting on pay. I mean, this is also avoiding the kind of extreme versions, but that needs to be discussed for sure. That's the legal element. I think there is another element which, I mean, to come back to Masada's points on fears, it's also political. I think there is a political dimension that is very important. There are reasons why some countries were afraid and are afraid of European integration. I mean, if you look at the treaties, if you look at, you know, this kind of constitutional asymmetry that Vitemis was talking about, there was some elements to it in the treaties, and there is also some, you know, political interpretation of the treaties that have been, you know, used for a long time that prevailed, and so if the discourse doesn't change, the fears also won't disappear. So I think this is a political dimension. Third one is economic dimension, and I think this is also, if you look at the treaties, wages is basically still seen as you know, hindering job creation, competitiveness, and so on. Even though we really have strong evidence now that there is no, you know, that there is no negative effect on it. You look at the introduction of minimum wage in the UK, in Germany. I mean, you know, ESA studies, all of it is really very conclusive on you know, the absence of a negative impact on job creation. And so I think also in the way we think of this, that, you know, wage increases can lead to long-term productivity. This is also a finding that, you know, is kind of post-Keynesian in a sense, but it's also very important to reflect upon and to change a bit the kind of software within EU institutions. I'm coming back to your point on cohesion policy, Maria. Is it irrelevant today on cohesion policy? I mean, it's basically cohesion policy, a bit less relevant now that we have a social pillar, if I put it in provocative terms. I don't think it's irrelevant, and I still think it has a strong added value for two reasons. I mean, the main principles behind cohesion policy are about, you know, the partnership principle, and it's about basically having a place-based approach, which means you have to spend your funds in a very granular way, not, you know, as a kind of one go. And actually, you could also argue that a risk from the EU treaties is that there is a one-size-fits-none kind of dimension, which is, again, institutional, because, you know, the European Central Bank cannot account for all the diversity. And I would say it's also potentially also a bit sociological, because, you know, people in Brussels at some point also have less connection to the local level. And so, you know, having this kind of preservation of this dimension of, you know, you have to look at where the funds are actually going within the different regions is actually a very strong safeguard within the treaties, and also for a good practice to consider for other EU funds. And to link it, just to basically link the two questions, what could be done for cohesion policy to be more supportive of the social pillar? I think there are ways to make them more complementary. One of them is to look at conditions the conditions upon which the funds are being distributed. Do we need to have, you know, labor standards, social standards being respected when we provide EU funds, as much as we need to, you know, look for the rule of law? And I think this is something that is not always the case, that leads to some contradictions. So having, you know, the social pillar as an anchor for cohesion policy and, in general, EU budget spending would be very helpful. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I think it's rather a comment also to take up what was already said regarding Article 153, but also what are elements, for example, in our proposal for treaty changes in social policy is indeed on one hand, at the moment, social partners have to be consulted in the area of social policy, but there are other policy areas that are very important to be consulted on that especially refer also to a key competence of social partners like wage setting. So to enlarge this is one of the proposals, but also indeed, as it was said here on the panel, if you to open and reform Article 153, because we still have some areas there in unanimity to transfer this to qualified majority, but also, and this relates to the digital questions also and climate, that we propose to include a new competence, and that is on just transition and anticipating change. And I think this could really help to address challenges much better here than we can do it. And I agree, I think we have to have a different view in general on the question of convergence, especially when we look at further enlargement and in all areas, and to see what mechanisms can we develop to guarantee really a stronger convergence, because what we can have seen after the last enlargement is that it doesn't work properly anymore. But this needs a more overall debate, cannot be only in social policy.
Thanks, Gabi. Very fundamental questions you are raising. Vitalis, please.
If I may, sometimes we are creating some misleading narratives. And speaking of Brussels and national state, I am from Lithuania. I was commissioner, but I know that in commission you have all those who are from different countries. It means that Brussels is in Vilnius, Brussels is in Bucharest, Brussels is in Berlin. And when we are speaking about shared competences, we need to understand that it is possibility to solve problems in better way on the ground, to help concretely people to solve problems. People with rare diseases. It would be good to have European insurance fund for people to rare diseases, because it's very costly. We need to use economy of scale. We need to reduce prices of medicines. We need to use joint procurement. We need to solve problems with orphan drugs. Why? Because it is a requirement from people on the ground. It's not about powers in Brussels. It's absolutely a mistake. European Health Union is not about consolidating more powers within Brussels. No, it's about possibilities to help every health minister to solve their own problems in an effective way, not in 10 years or in 15 years, but in 2 years, in 1 year, solving problems now. Orphan drugs, we need to have those drugs now in EU. It's about European sovereignty. When we're speaking global health policy, one health policy, when we're speaking about possibilities to present EU power at United Nations level, we need to have EU as a legal entity to speaking about global health and defending all 500 million Europeans. It's about us, about problems on the ground. It's not about something, keep powers into Brussels, or then, like British lying, keep powers back. It's absolutely a mistake. The same when you spoke about convention problems. The slogan in France was, Polish plumber. Polish plumber. Polish plumber can, occupy your working places. That was on the streets. I was there in the time of this referendum. Why? Where is now that Polish plumber? Yes, it's in Warsaw. It's not a sort of occupied Paris. It's once again misleading information. When we are speaking about shared competence, we need to understand it is much more strengthening every state's sovereignty. because it can help with every state to solve their own problems concretely on the ground. And European Health Union is about exactly about that. And we need to understand comitology, shared competences, possibilities to have real cooperative mechanism. That's what we need now if we are thinking about more active and more effective decision-making process. Why we need to discuss Lisbon Treaty? For me, no doubts that we need to convene new convention and to see how can we do our best. Otherwise, people do not believe in European Union. Discontent in the EU in some societies is very high. Medical deserts in every country. Healthcare workforce shortages. There's a lot of problems on the ground. But nobody can solve it because we have no possibilities to solve those together with shared competences. I can provide a lot of examples why we need now to move in such more effective way. Speaking about us, about sovereignty in every country, in every state, in every village.
Great, Vitelis. Very good examples why we do need to address the issue of target changes in the treaties. And now with this good assessment of different challenges in different policies, we need to conclude using the last minute. So Gabi, if you want to join me again here in the podium, please, and we will conclude.
So thank you very much. Thank you for these interesting debates that we had this morning. As I said in my introduction, really timely and I think also very well prepared here. I think it came out very clear that we are living in a different world than 20 years ago or 14 years ago, with new challenges, with also a totally different geopolitical situation, with different technologies that we have. Also, if you look at, for example, the challenges of the climate crisis, much more obvious than 15 years ago, and citizens experience it much stronger as a challenge and a need, but also with different citizens' expectations to the European Union. And I think this is, for me, the first important strand I take from the report, is it will help us as we are working now on the narrative for this process. And I think the focus really here on public goods and also the connection between public goods and strong democratic institutions, also meaning new ways of a stronger participatory democracy will be key to have a convincing narrative also with the citizens here for this process. And we know after the last convention how essential it is to have a convincing narrative for these reforms. And we need drivers for these reforms because it takes obviously a lot of courage to reform the current European Union. I think in the narrative also it became very clear in the debates the different forms of security for citizens. And I think really in terms of cybersecurity, food security, health, social security, in a lot of areas, also defense, and to really develop what changes Europe needs that it can deliver on these securities, because in some areas it can, and it showed it. in some area it just did, even if you look at the treaties, was very complicated, but was able to deliver. But also we know where also strong limitations are. And that leads also to the second level, really on the concrete areas for treaty change. And also here, as the focus is on targeted, I mean, it is very obvious if you look at the digital sphere, and I will take this quote with me for the next debates, that digital is not mentioned in the Lisbon Treaty at all, but also to show how important it is if you want to have certain forms of security, that Europe is better equipped for in the area, especially here, digital, social, health, energy policy, very much connected also to the new challenges that we have, and also at the same time very focused, very concrete here. I mean, up to debates about sovereignty and strategic autonomy. And I think we should look at all the policy areas we discussed and check always, does it improve the sovereignty or what limits it, and therefore what changes do we need for that. If you look at the report on the other side that we did, I think we take really on board many of these debates, but also at the same time, it is very clear it's a compromise between EPP, S&D, Renew, Greens, and Left. But it's still possible in the European Parliament to do this in key essential areas. And I think this is also a good signal. So the question is, we need to be bold. And how do we get there? That's the key question. And here the report goes into say, okay, at least one institution comes up with a proposal and a clear demand to launch a convention. And hopefully, and I think something is moving, we also touched the debate on enlargement and the question of enlargement and reform, how essential that is, so that at least 14 member states have the courage to start the process, but also how to take the others with them in the process. So the focus, I really liked also in your report, these 5 major reforms. I think really the thing will be to focus it on message is delivering better for citizens in the future. And with this, I thank again Maria, FEPS, everyone here in the Secretariat to make it possible that we could have this really interesting debate. And I think this could be already a basis for what we need once the convention starts. I was responsible as S&D Vice President, but also in the Conference on the Future of Europe, we need to coordinate our progressive caucus. And we managed, with all the differences from different levels, also to have a joint resolution, what we expected from the Conference of Europe, and we would need a very strong progressive caucus for the convention, and maybe this will be something that we have to start to deliver, and I think we have a good basis for that. So thank you very much, Maria.
Well, a few words from my side. Gabi, first of all, many thanks for this, us running together this symposium in the European Parliament. The EU treaties, they have a potential to be used, but the time has come to reassess these treaties. And this is happening now in all European institutions. Next week, the European Parliament will very likely take a measured step with its own report. This is supposed to be transmitted to the European Council, which, according to the treaties, should define a position. I believe that the major trigger to open this discussion will be enlargement, because enlargement is now a moral and political imperative. Nevertheless, we are saying that there are other reasons why we need to assess the treaties. And the main reasons are citizens' concerns, their request for us to invent new European public goods. And that's why our report, I believe, is a useful contribution for this debate, because we show what is needed to deliver on these European public goods when it comes competences of the European Union and new ways to decide and to act more effectively. We could give many examples, but I would like to express our gratitude particularly to all the authors of the report. So here we are with the report. To the European Parliament as institution, and particularly the S&D Group and the co-rapporteur Gabi Bischoff, many thanks for our cooperation, but also our support for your boldness and political courage. We need this to make history in the European project. And my last word is to express our gratitude to European citizens and those who are also following us online, because they were so creative in the Conference on the Future of Europe. And building on that, we could identify many concrete ideas, starting with the European electric grid, going to digital public infrastructure, going to European platforms to deliver on the digital transformation, building up a European unemployment insurance, building up a European insurance against rare diseases, and also making sure that when Europeans, we take position in front of outstanding international problems, starting with wars and conflicts, we come with a stronger and single voice. This is our wish, and let's go on working together because the window of opportunity is there. Many thanks, and I invite you to come, the authors, to take a picture.
And many thanks to the interpreters for making it possible that we could communicate with each other. Thank you.